At the beginning of the movie, we meet Sven as he frantically wakes up late one morning and runs to wake his 9-year-old daughter Charlie, who's hard of hearing. Sven gets Charlie dressed, sets up her hearing aid, and the two run out of the door to make it to the local pub, where they broadcast the live feeds from NASA as it follows the recent mission in outer space. The mission is led by celebrated astronaut Paula, who's Sven's wife and Charlie's mother, and her colleague Hadi. Everyone in the pub waits in anticipation, hoping to watch the astronauts return back to Earth safely. After moments of tense anticipation, the International Space Station was seen traveling toward Earth. However, in a peculiar fashion, it doesn't activate its parachute, which worries everyone as it looks like the rocket is free-falling down to Earth. Inside the rocket, the alarm blares warning the astronauts to activate the parachute while Hades screams and pleads with Paula, who seems to be frozen in shock, to press the activation button. After some harrowing moments of uncertainty, Paula activates the parachutes and the rocket lands on Earth in Chile safely, which leaves everyone feeling relieved. That night, Paula calls Sven and tells him that she has something important to tell him, and as the conversation goes on, her tone becomes more cryptic. She randomly starts talking about the board games that they used to play when they were young, but doesn't finish her thoughts. She then cuts the conversation short and tells him that she can't wait to see him and Charlie the next day, and then hangs up. The next morning, Sven wakes up early and drives the very excited Charlie to the airport to welcome Paula. There they meet Hadi's wife Mira and her sons, who are also waiting impatiently to see their father. After a few minutes, it's announced in the airport that Paula and Hadi's flight from Chile had been delayed. Dismayed, Sven and Mira keep the kids occupied, hoping the delay will soon be rectified. After hours of waiting, Sven excuses himself to go to the bathroom. However, when he comes back out, a few moments later, as all hell has broken loose in the waiting area of the airport, people are crying, running around and having panic attacks, and he navigates through the chaos and finds Charlie and Hadi's family. He then learns the horrifying fact that the plane from Chile has seemingly vanished into thin air. Sven comforts Charlie while deep down trying to calm himself, and the people waiting for the flight in question were all taken to a hotel so that they could wait there and hear updates on the situation of their families. That night, Sven prepares Charlie for bed and reads her a story about the time the people of Earth and Unity sent a message titled Hello to outer space, comprised of a map of Earth, pictures of humans, and lists of their languages, hoping if anyone was out there in space that they will find it and use it to get in contact with them. Charlie, who's very bright and receptive, was fascinated and distracted from the current events by the story and falls asleep, and the next morning, all the adults in the hotel are called for a meeting and learn that search jets have been sent to the last known location of the Chile flight. While there was no sign of it anywhere, wreckage is seen scattered across the Atlantic Ocean, which suggests it's the flight in question and that there are no survivors. Sven was shocked, confused, heartbroken, and most of all, he was overwhelmed and wanted to protect Charlie. As he runs to his room where he left Charlie, he is intercepted by federal police that have come to ask him about his wife's state of mind right before the Chile flight took off. He was annoyed at their timing and their insensitivity and refuses to speak to them, and he fetches Charlie, shields her from the news, and proceeds to leave the hotel. However, he is intercepted once more by Nora, who is Benicia Medil's, the billionaire who had funded Paula and Hadi's space travel, personal assistant. Nora admits that she's stricken with survivor's guilt as she was supposed to be on the flight that day but somehow cancelled at the very last minute. Sven drives Charlie home while making sure she doesn't know what happened, and he puts her to bed and takes a moment to process the events of the day. Then eerily, he receives a voice message from Paula that had been sent before her flight took off, and in it, she states that St. Nicholas's Day, which also happens to be their 10th anniversary, is coming up and that she wants to celebrate it grandly. She also adds that Sven should make sure to never fight with Charlie. Sven was confused with the message because Paula seems to have the date of their anniversary wrong, which seems very out of character for the bright astronaut. He was even more bewildered by Paula's advice about Charlie, as he never fights with her. So he calls Mira and tells her, hoping she would make sense of it, and Mira dismisses his concerns, saying it sounds like a normal thing a wife can ask of, and advises him to just get some rest so he can think clearly. The next morning, Sven finds Charlie watching the news and tells her what he knows. and Charlie breaks down in tears as Sven hugs her and comforts her. After a few hours, the police came to Sven's residence and play an audio that was captured right before the disappearance of the Chile flight, and in it his wife is heard addressing Sven from the cockpit, telling him that he can't do it alone and how much she loves him, and the police start questioning Sven about how she had managed to get herself into the cockpit, to which he had no answer. Sven decides to do his own investigation and watches the interview video of Hadi taken right after they dismount the International Space Station, and then he discovers a discrepancy that the video was not actually televised live as it claims to have been, and he immediately calls Paula's boss Rainer, who gives him vague and elusive answers and advises him to get some rest, which doesn't sit well with Sven. The scenes go back to 3 months to show Paula about her family's prepare for departure, and Paula tells Charlie how space travel works, gives her an old radio, and tells her how to use it to communicate with her. Paula leaves for her mission in space to study the characteristics of healing cells in space, and once there, she befriends the rest of the astronauts on board and gets acclimated quickly. One day, as Paula drifts to sleep, she's awakened by a distant echoing voice that repeatedly calls out hello, transmitted over the communication radio. She hurries to check it out, but is stunned to learn that the voice came as the International Space Station was passing through the dead zone, which corresponds to an area over the Atlantic Ocean that doesn't allow communication between Earth and outer space. She writes down the exact coordinates at which the signal came through on her arm and hurriedly takes over her voice recorder and records the transmission. The second episode starts by going even further to when Sven and Paula first started dating, and one day, the couple together with Hadi and Mira go out to have some fun, and as the night progresses, Paula takes some PCP to enjoy herself, and all of a sudden, Paula starts having severe visual and auditory hallucinations, which cause her to act like a crazy person, screaming nonstop one moment and shutting off the next. They rush her to the emergency room, and even there, it takes the doctors a while to manage her and her symptoms. She's diagnosed with psychosis, given medication, and strictly advised to stay off drugs. Once released from the hospital, Paula apologizes to Sven for scaring him and for everything that's happened, and then he forgives her, and their relationship thrives and they get married soon after. Fast forward to the time of her mission, Paula informs Hadi her discoveries of the signal in the dead zone, and he was fascinated and hears the recording over and over again, trying to figure out its origins. Paula proposes that they inform the rest of the astronauts, as the discovery may have greater implications than they could ever imagine, and Hadi agrees but proposes that they should first make sure by repeating the experiment so as to be certain and discard any doubts, and Paula agrees. The next morning, despite her agreement with Hadi, Paula brings up the topic over breakfast and details the signal to the other 2 astronauts, who were flabbergasted. The astronauts ask to hear the recording, and as Paula excitedly plays her recording, she is confused that nothing of what she described comes through, and she tries the cassette multiple times, but it doesn't work, leaving everyone bewildered. Hadi then quickly steps in and hints that Paula may have space sickness, in which people may find themselves having symptoms of mental breakdown for failure to acclimate to their new surroundings. The 2 astronauts agree and propose for her to sleep it off, and Hadi takes her aside and talks to her, and Paula was in a state of confusion and insists that she knows what she's heard and tries to probe Hadi's memory continuously, telling him he heard it too, and Hadi looks confused himself and asks her what she's talking about. Paula starts doubting herself and breaks down, but Hadi supports her and tells her to take some time looking after herself, and that he will cover for her in the meantime, and that he will be there for her for whatever else she might need. Paula was confused and was touched by her friend's compassion and thanks him and retreats to her sleeping area. There she experiences visual and tactile hallucinations, where she could no longer see the coordinates she wrote on her arm, and she starts to freak out. Feeling helpless and out of options, she injects herself with a strong antipsychotic medication from the first aid kit, which knocks her out for a really long time. When she comes to, Hadi was there by her side, and he tells her that he didn't share her condition about the injection to others of fear of their work losing credibility and her reputation being ruined, and welcomes her back to work. Then Paula calls Benicia, who was also like her mentor, to tell her what happened and apologize for risking the mission. Benicia accepts her apology and tells her that her hallucinations may be visions, and pledges her full support before hanging up. Later that day, Paula was ready to be taken back to her role and travels from her sleeping area to the main communication room, but is stopped dead in her tracks when she sees Hadi with a tape recorder in his hand playing the hello message that she lost over and over again with fascination. She quickly returns to her sleeping area, checks her arm to find the coordinates written as clearly as she remembers them, and cries with relief. Back to the present day, Sven was having a hard time dealing with everything that was going on while still trying to do what's best for Charlie and tending to her. And when he fails to provide an answer to the police about Paula's message from the cockpit, they release it to the media and crime scene investigation units swarm his house trying to comb through Paula's things and find answers. As soon as the recording makes its way around the house, a crowd of journalists and grieving people flood his house, also looking to interview him and find answers. When he ignores them for a few days, they start getting hostile, screaming obscenities and threatening him, and Paula's parents come to check on Sven and Charlie and provide moral support. Charlie was happy to have her grandparents there, but keeps getting in more arguments with her father over her denial of Paula's death. One day, Sven wakes up early in the morning and finds Charlie sitting by the old radio waiting for Paula to call, and he then unplugs and dismantles the radio and takes it away while she begs him not to. Then people gather around his house throwing stones and threatening him, and Charlie, as they blame Paula for the plane crash and for the death of over 150 people. Thinking it's no longer safe for Charlie to stay there, Sven sends her away with her grandparents, but just after a few miles, she sees a plane overhead, mistakes it for a satellite, and screams to be taken back to her house where her mother knows to contact her. Sven was out of options but doesn't force her to return to her grandparents and lets her stay there but takes off her hearing aid so she won't hear the horrible things being said from outside their house. Nora comes to visit Sven and Charlie later that day and tells Sven how hurt Benicia was about what happened to Paula, whom she sees like a daughter, and gives her a tiny communication device that's protected against hackers. As Nora steps out to leave, one of the people gathered outside throws red paint all over her and accuses her and her boss of being responsible for the tragedy. Later that night, Sven receives a call from Rainer, who tells him that he just realized that there may be something mysterious going on, and that Sven was right to start asking questions. Just as he was about to elaborate his thoughts, someone knocks at his door. Rainer puts the phone on hold to answer the door, but never returns. Worried, he leaves his house with Charlie to take her to Hadi's house so that she can stay there for the night while he goes looking for Rainer at his house. While he's at Rainer's house, someone watches Sven discreetly as he enters the empty house, and he looks through all the rooms and finds nothing. Just as he was about to leave, he finds a dossier labeled Top Secret, stashed away secretly. Excited, he takes it and drives back to Hadi's house and enters the house excitedly, telling Mira that he had gone through the file and learned that Paula had indeed discovered something. Mira asks him to explain what he means while she follows him into her house, and once inside, both Sven and Mira were terrified to see Charlie was not there on the sofa where she was sleeping. Sven looks for her everywhere but couldn't find her, and then he sees a car outside the house and runs to it to see the man that assaulted Nora with red paint, full of anger and ready to attack him. Sven desperately screams for the man to let go of Charlie, and at the start of the episode, Sven and Paula are shown spending their last night together before Paula had to set off for space the next day. Paula reveals her true motivation for going to space and conducting the healing cells research, and hopes that she can one day use it for Charlie so that her daughter can feel vibrations in her senses and doesn't have to rely on a computer for hearing. Back to the mission, we are taken to the night she sees Hadi listening to her tape. Paula hears Hadi approaching and pretends to be sleeping, and he checks on her and returns without suspecting that he had been caught in his mischief. The next day, Paula calls Benicia and reports everything that's happened since they last spoke. Benicia was shocked to hear about Hadi's betrayal, but encourages Paula to keep going, adding that she should be careful not to trust anyone. Paula takes her advice and carries on like nothing had happened, and then Paula spends time calculating the arrival of what she believes are aliens that have transmitted the hello signal. Once done, she fakes an emergency at the satellite, blares the alarm, and when everyone responds to it, she stays back at a calculated time where the satellite gets in the dead zone and connects to hear the signal once more. She then pretends like she hasn't heard the alarm on account of her headphones and manages to join the rest without falling under suspicion. Paula continues to watch Hadi closely and learns that he'd calculated the time of the alien's arrival on Earth the wrong way, which she happily reports to Benicia. One day, all of the occupants of the satellite gather around to have meals and celebrate the end of their trip and congratulate one another, and Paula pulls Hadi aside and tells him that she knows what he had done and informs him that his calculations are all wrong, which leaves Hadi shocked and speechless. Hadi then waits for the right time when the rest of the astronauts were asleep, and then traps Paula and sucks the oxygen out of her cell while demanding she tell him the right calculation and result she found for the time, date, and place of the alien's arrival, and Paula holds out the information for a while, but she was forced to respond as Hadi lets the oxygen drop below 3%. Then as soon as she tells him, Hadi opens the cell and starts apologizing for what he did, and he elaborates that he's just a pawn forced and threatened to do against his will. Paula acts unaffected and continues to talk about the alien's arrival as Hadi realizes in terror that she's recording and transmitting the conversation for the whole world to hear. Hadi panics and tells her she doesn't know and understand the gravity of what she had done and threatens that her actions might be responsible for sparking the next world war. When we go back to the present day, Sven follows the car only to see Charlie was not inside, so he goes back to Mira's place to think of his next move. There he remembers a conversation he had with Charlie where she mentioned she wrote down all the details of her space calls with her mom, and he runs home to read it, hoping to find a clue. He finds in the notes a possible location and gathers his stuff to leave, but is intercepted by two detectives demanding to know why he was seen leaving Rayner's, who's now been reported missing, and why he had a file in his hand. Sven doesn't have a good explanation other than to show the file to one of the detectives, who's blown away by what she reads. Then she's convinced by his theory that something weird was going on and lets him go so he can find Charlie. She goes home with her partner to figure out exactly what happened on the flight, and they go through all the files over and over again and finally find a discrepancy between the departure time listed on the document from the local air control and the airport. They work it out some more and discover that someone left the plane just before takeoff and after boarding their carry-on luggage, which suggests a bombing. The two detectives rush into their car to warn Sven, but a speeding truck crashes into them and kills them on the spot. Meanwhile, Sven finds Charlie at a place from the notes, and just as the two reunite, they hear a strange sound overhead. They run to escape, but are captured and brought to a military base. At the base, Sven was perplexed to see Rayner safe and sound watching TV, and Rayner explains that sensing he was in danger, he had called the military and voluntarily came there for safety. Then the overhead sounds were intensifying and they go out to see military jets crashing with an unknown flying object. The episode opens showing the astronauts reaching Earth and leaving their satellite in Chile, where they were welcomed by Benicia and Nora. Benicia regretfully tells Paula that after her transmission went public about the arrival of the aliens, the government took it upon itself to attack and destroy the creature's vessel. But Paula was not fazed and reveals to shock of Benicia that she gave the wrong information on the transmission in fear that they would react the way that they did, and she added that once she safely reaches her home, she will think about possibly sharing the right information and asks Benicia to help her get her family to safety. Benicia orders Nora to get all the necessary arrangements done, and as they conclude their discussion, Paula asks Benicia if Hadi was a pawn who might be his queen. Benicia was shocked at the question but tries to mask it by feigning ignorance. Back at the present day, Sven and Charlie were released from the military camp, and immediately after the military finishes carrying out its attacks on the flying objects, they are said that the aliens are destroyed before they can ever get close to see their identity and return home, where they try to go back to their normal lives. The next morning, it's released on the news that the military jets had the wrong information and failed in taking down the alien vessel. Sven goes through Charlie's notes and finds coordinates, believing it's the right one, and he takes Charlie with him and sets off to find the place, but on their way, they are hit by a speeding truck. Bruised and banged up, Sven calls Nora using the apparatus she gave him. A couple of days later, Sven and Charlie find themselves being nursed back to health in Benisha's residence, and Charlie gets along with Benisha and tells her about the new coordinates that they were following at the time of the incident, and Benisha offers to take them there, and they're joined by Nora and fly in Benisha's private jet, and after traveling some distance, Sven receives the multiple messages that the detectives were trying to send him all the time of their accident, which reveals that Benisha was behind the plane crash. Sven couldn't believe it, and Nora intercepts this message and informs Benisha about it, which infuriates her, and Benisha admits it and tells him that she did it because she wanted to protect Earth by destroying the aliens, as she doesn't want history to repeat itself. She elaborates further that Paula stood in her way, and so she had to be taken care of for the sake of the greater good. They get to the coordinates and wait for the aliens the whole night, and they didn't come, and Benisha gets angry and orders Nora to kill both Sven and Charlie and walks away. Nora pretends to kill them and helps them get away, and as they get away, Sven remembers his late wife's last voicemail and figures out that the numbers on Charlie's book were just the coordinates, and it's to the place on St. Nicholas's Day. So the father-daughter duo follow the necessary coordinates and go to the corresponding area on St. Nicholas Day, and a few minutes after they get there, they see a vessel speeding toward Earth. It lands, and they were excited to find the hello message sent by the then strongly united people of Earth in different languages. It's reported in the media that Nora had confessed to her role in the plane crash, and both her and Benisha were imprisoned, and the series comes to an end.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.